bottom line of his message is that things are never going to go back to what they were between Israel and the United States. And even more of a bottom line was to tell Israelis the current situation in which you are accustomed to basically doing whatever you want and getting US backing for it, that's over.
So the US and Iran traded even more airstrikes and counterstrikes in the Persian Gulf area on Saturday and Sunday. There was few reports of casualties. There was a bit of footage of smoke rising from a site targeted in Kuwait by the Iranians. And it looked rather dramatic, but we're not sure what was hit. Was it an energy installation? Was it as the Iranians claim, a HIMARS site? That is a short-range, highly powerful, highly precise artillery that is used by the Americans from short range, from Kuwait, to attack sites in Iran. But we're not sure what was hit. The censorship is prevailing. It's quite extraordinary. Media outlets, open source intelligence aficionados are really struggling to just figure out what is going on in this war. And there should be just more of an outcry from all sides about just what is happening. What is the damage? What is the nature of the sites hit? I know you can't give exact battle assessments for fear of alerting the enemy as to the accuracy and efficacy of their targeting, but really the public that is financing this war, the communities and countries that are losing ground economically, politically, geopolitically, and in some cases materially and physically by contributing to this war effort, they have a right to know what is going on. I'm Borzou Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at Borzou, borzou.substack.com. You can also find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. So today I have part one of a really great interview I have had recently with Noga Tarnopolsky. She is an Israeli-based journalist. And on part one of the rather lengthy discussion we had recently, we discussed the visit by the U.S. Democratic Party stalwart Rahm Emanuel to Israel and the tough talk he gave to the Israelis. But first, I just want to talk about this ongoing conflict. It's really, really dangerous what is happening. You have the Iranians and the Americans both escalating. They're both searching for some way of establishing control over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran by way of attacking any ships that cross without its permission, and the United States by targeting Iran's supposed ability to make these strikes. Look, I don't think that the U.S. strategy is going to work simply because the Strait of Hormuz is so narrow that the Iranians, it's just very easy for them to disrupt shipping traffic. Iran doesn't even need to utilize its most potent weaponry to do this. It doesn't need to utilize these missile city bases filled with ballistic missiles to hit the ships that are crossing through the Strait of Hormuz and disrupt traffic. All it has to do is fly a few drones. Those can be flown from anywhere. Those can be launched from a ship. They can be launched from a beach. Basically, the joke I used to have is any kid with a slingshot and a few firecrackers could disrupt traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, because that will spook the investors in those shipping companies. It will spook the insurers in London, and it will create havoc and prevent a large number of ships from going through, disrupt global energy trade, and so on. There has to be a political solution. And one political solution is that the US and the Iran come up with a deal. And the other is that there is regime change in Iran, or possibly in Washington. Who knows when and where it will happen first. But I also just wanted to comment a little bit about what I'm seeing is a lack of really public protest about this conflict, because we have these people, crazed people on both sides, these extremists on both sides, these extremist neocons in Washington, these extremist IRGC guys in Tehran, and they're dragging the world into this war, and they're damaging the world economy. Where are the protests? Where's the anti-war people? People should be speaking out about this. You know what? The Democrats and some Republicans even in the United States, they voted for a War Powers Resolution Act. They required that this war be authorized by Congress, and yet they have not really tried to push that through. They've not tried to implement that, and they're letting Donald Trump get away with whatever he wants to get away with with regard to Iran. And As for Iran, I think that there needs to be way more questioning, even among their own elites, about this war strategy, because it is very risky. It is risky for the Iranian people who want some measure of peace and stability and economic improvement. I know the argument that the United States is being dishonest and so on, and that the United States was not abiding by the terms of the memorandum of understanding, but at least there needs to be more discussion about how dangerous this Iranian strategy is, and you're not seeing that. Instead, you're seeing just a lot of bluster. And on the United States side as well, and the Europeans as well, where they do have the freedom to protest, there should be a lot more criticism and outspokenness about the direction that their leaders are taking the world economy right now, because it's going to damage everyone. Just a programming note, I'm not in Paris or Istanbul right now. I'm in the Chicago area, and I will be here for about a month, so excuse the continued abnormal studio circumstances. I'll try to get some better lights in this little de facto studio, and hopefully the sound quality will be up to par. But in any case, while I was in Paris, I did interview Noga Tornopolsky, and this is that interview, part one. Part two, I'll try to air tomorrow. Super interesting development. Rahm Emanuel, he's the former mayor of Chicago and a one-time chief of staff to Barack Obama. He showed up in Israel and he gave a talk at Tel Aviv University in which he said some very unprecedented stuff. It was meant as a talk to give some truth, some harsh truths to the Israeli people and the political elite. If you listen to the talk, or at least just a summary of it, there was also a lot of the same old talking points in there about how the Palestinians have not been a decent partner for peace, and a lot of the same kind of 90s myths about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. But there were also some pretty harsh and interesting comments that he made. And today we're joined by Noga Tarlanspowski. She is an Israeli journalist, and I think American-based journalist. I'm not sure. I've been on television with her, and she has had always a very nuanced view on events going on in Israel and the Palestinian territories. She is a correspondent for France 24 and is, like I said, frequently on panels and guest panels with me. And I thought it would be super cool to talk to her about the visit of Rahm Emanuel, as well as other stuff going on in Israel, including Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister's decision to stop abiding by certain Supreme Court decisions that his government doesn't like, which has created a real crisis for people in Israel and has put the country in a situation that it has never been in before. Joining me now is Noga Tarlanspowski. So, Noga, thank you so much for joining me. And I guess I just wanted to ask, in the little pre-discussions that we had, you said you actually attended this talk by Rahm Emanuel. Can you just give your summary of what he said, and then I'll ask you further how the reaction was. But just, I guess, first of all, what did he say for people who are not familiar with it and aren't terminally online?
Good question. First of all, let me tell you why I decided to go. And it's because I really do perceive that Israeli-American relations right now are at a tipping point. I mean, I could have watched this speech on Zoom like so many other people, but I felt like I should be there and I should get a sense of the vibe. I should see even him. And I felt that it was worth it.
And you're a journalist. I mean, you want to see, it's an event.
There you go.
Yeah.
So he actually was walking something of a tightrope. He was addressing Israelis very much in his role as an American politician, and there was clearly an aspect to his presentation that involved him somehow showing off his foreign policy chops to his own American audience. But paradoxically, there was also a big aspect of the talk which was sort of like a family intervention, right? Some kind of tough love. And it was very interesting to see that play out. The summary is, I think he gave a very good speech. Very polished, very intelligent, nuanced. I don't know what impact it may have. The bottom line of his message is that things are never going to go back to what they were between Israel and the United States. And even more of a bottom line was to tell Israelis the current situation in which you are accustomed to basically doing whatever you want and getting US backing for it, that's over. It's not sustainable, and in fact, it doesn't exist anymore. But he went into details and he presented a reality check, I would say, for Israelis. I think that to give you a sense of this speech, I have to first give you a sense of where I think Israelis are. So Israelis are very, very confused right now. If I can speak, on behalf of a population of 10.2 million people, my sense is that for many reasons, Israelis right now are very confused. Israelis are by and large perplexed about why the world hates them. And that is a very difficult thing to express to anybody outside of Israel, which is most of the world. So while most of the world, including friends of Israel, like very much Rahm Emanuel, have been now fed almost 3 years of images of a kind of unrestrained brutality by Israel. And Israel is perceived by the people who've seen this as a kind of murderous imperialist state. Israelis only understand that through the lens that's been given to them by their government, and it breaks my heart to tell you, repeated by their media, which is basically, these people are all anti-Semites.
They see those images as well. Aren't they heartbroken when they see like a Palestinian doctor who used to work in Israel and has friendships with Israeli colleagues and so on being killed in an airstrike? Doesn't that break their heart a little?
Israelis aren't seeing that, Borzu.
What do you mean they're not seeing that?
Well, Israelis by and large speak Hebrew and by and large are dependent on their own media space. And this is a media space that, with some notable exceptions, has more or less accepted the strictures imposed by the government, has engaged in a sort of lengthy self-censorship throughout this war. So while we in the Foreign Press Association, for example, have sued the Israeli state so as to have access to Gaza so that we can report what we actually see with our own eyes, the Israeli media, by and large, with some exceptions, has accepted the decision by the Israeli government to prevent any journalistic access to Gaza. The one place where this has broken through in the way that you're describing somewhat is in the West Bank, because Israeli journalists do have access to the West Bank. So here we're in a different kind of paradoxical situation in which, on the one hand, Israeli media coverage of the West Bank has been quite good. There have been even entire investigations done of these sort of settler militias that are subsidized by the Israeli government. Israelis see that, and there's a lot more questioning about what's happening in the West Bank. But at the same time, you have government ministers who claim that this is all an invention, right?
I'm laughing at your cat. I just walking across the scene there.
My beautiful cat. So I can describe to you really an obscenity that appeared this week from the office of Israel's Minister of Culture. And I want to put that in quotation marks, because this individual, whose name is Miki Zohar, is such a political hack. He doesn't even hide it. He's such an uncultured person for holding that job. The opening of the Jerusalem Film Festival was held last night, not far from where I'm sitting right now, and he didn't even bother showing up. He would have been booed out of town had he shown up, but he didn't even make a pretense. Instead, he put out a little election video, which I'll send to you, it's difficult to describe, but it's a kind of adolescent little video clip showing greasy, stereotypical Hollywood types, a little too chubby and chomping a cigar, staging violence against Palestinians. So the violence against Palestinians is being shown by a minister in the Israeli government as fake. And then what you see is every time they shoot another scene, they're getting thousands of shekels out of a ATM machine that's right behind them. So Israelis, even those who do follow the news and who are aware of what's going on in the West Bank, are seeing this at the same time. And this is lies and propaganda funded by the state coffers, being emitted by a minister of government. And so Israelis are trapped in that space right now. And the situation regarding Gaza is infinitely worse.
In terms of, yeah, understanding of what's happening there. And so Ram walks into this environment. He walks into this space where images from Gaza and the international outrage, images from Gaza are censored. International outrage is incomprehensible over Gaza. And the West Bank is also thrown into question by these counter narratives thrown up by these right-wing ministers. So even that is not straightforward to people. And Ram walks into this room and he says, what essentially?
Look, he did a masterful job. I think a lot of politicians could learn from him because his father was born here in Jerusalem. And his father actually fought for the pre-Israeli state for a right-wing militia. And his uncle is buried here on the Mount of Olives. So he started with that. He started by saying to Israelis in a very, I would say, simple way, in accessible language, I understand you. He started by doing something very few foreign leaders have done since Joe Biden, actually, which is accept fully the Israeli description of the tragedy that occurred to Israelis on October 7th. He doesn't say there's a context to it, you have to understand. He says the extent of the violence, the sexual barbarism, the total betrayal that you experienced is heartbreaking, and I was there with you. And that was very effective. And I think allowed him then an avenue into his tougher message, which is none of what happened to you can justify continued American support for what you have done since. And that's the complicated message. He didn't fall into the trap of saying, how dare you, and what is wrong with Israel. He did condemn Prime Minister Netanyahu in, I would say, pretty dry and factual terms. But he basically, after really saying, I share your heartbreak, I was right there with you, he then takes a step away and starts speaking as an American politician and basically says, you're another ally of ours. The special relationship, the special alliance between Israel and the United States, that's over. What the face that you have shown the world is no longer, he said, the face of a country with one of the highest rates of Nobel Prize winners per population, the startup nation. People now see you as barbaric murderers who are unfettered. And the United States is not going to keep supporting that. It's over. And after that message, he presented his own plan. He called it, if I'm not mistaken,
the 23-state solution.
Yeah, 23-state solution. It's a similar plan to other plans we've seen, by the way. It's similar in a way to the Saudi peace plan. It's similar to the J Street peace plan. It's an outline that all of us...
He's a J Street guy, isn't he? J Street.
I don't know, because his visceral connection to Israel... he did come with one sort of magic bullet, if I could use that term, and it's his empathy. He is viscerally connected and sort of invested in the continued existence of the state of Israel, much more than you hear normally from J Street representatives, certainly from any American...
Ami, who's the, I think, executive director of J Street, was heaping a lot of praise on Rahm Emanuel on social media. That's the only reason why it seemed like there was some kind of coordination there, if not.
You may know more than I do.
No. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Look, he presented a coherent plan, and he presented it to the right audience. We should say that too. He addressed Tel Aviv University. Which is what in the constellation of Israeli institutions? Look, like many American institutions, Tel Aviv University right now is on its own front lines, right? The Israeli government this week, as part of its avalanche of sort of authoritarian, anti-democratic laws, passed also, not yet into law, but passed, a certain level of parliamentary authorization, passed a law allowing for gender segregation in institutions of higher learning. And every single Israeli university, has now petitioned against that. Tel Aviv University, the president of Tel Aviv University spoke very briefly and I thought very courageously just before Rahm Emanuel. And he said that it was an honor to have him speak there because they consider themselves the premier liberal academic institution of Israel, that they're proud. He listed a whole long list of ethnicities, religions, identifications, everyone who attends Tel Aviv University. And he said he speaks for everyone. And he talked about, without getting into, delving into the gory details, he basically described standing at the head of a university that is facing an attempt to destroy it by the Israeli government and boycotts by the rest of the world. And, and I could tell you that just now as I was walking home to meet you, Haifa University joined the Tel Aviv University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in this petition against the government. They're fighting for their lives, and he made that clear. And so he was addressing, I would say, a public of university students, university professors, people who are scared, and then Israeli journalists. A columnist for Haaretz, Esther Solomon, wrote a piece afterwards, and she said that he came with a really important message for Israel, but are Israelis going to hear him?
Did they, you think? That's a good question. Did they hear him at least, even if they didn't agree? I mean, did it resonate? Was it reported on Channel 12, Channel 14, etc.?
So it turns out that Rahm Emanuel is friendly with Yonit Levy, one of the most prominent television journalists here, and he granted her an exclusive TV interview.
Yeah.
Right. So he did repeat his message in a popular Israeli TV channel,
Which one
almost verbatim.
Which channel was that?
Channel 12, what you just mentioned.
Yeah, that's the most important one, yeah.
And then he also gave interviews to other media, including the Jerusalem Post, which sadly I think today is barely can be called a media, but is a platform that right-wing supporters of Israel do rely on. I think Rahm Emanuel cannot be faulted for trying and cannot be faulted even for his media efforts surrounding the effort of his speech. He also met with the Israeli president. He did not meet with the prime minister. The prime minister's office attempted to make it sound like he's too unimportant a figure. Why would the prime minister ever meet him?
Yeah, yet the president, the nominal head of state, did meet him. So in a way, that's even more prestigious in the spectrum of political structures.
And the president met him in what is really, a historic and crucial and frightening week in Israel, which Israelis are well aware of. And this is the first Sunday of this week. The start of this week is the first time in the history of the state of Israel that the government officially declared that Israel is no longer being governed by rule of law.
Yeah, and I mentioned that in the introduction, and I want to get to that. That is a really important part of what's happening in the. But just to stay focused on Rahm for just a second here, what was the public reaction? Was there outrage? Was there any kind of evolution in public opinion? Any sign of that? Was there any sign of people either on social media or in the newspaper saying, "Gee, maybe he has a point"? Was there any minds changed, do you think?
I don't know that can be measured in, the 36 hours, the 48 hours since his speech, but I can tell you that he was received in that auditorium at Tel Aviv University by thundering applause. He was interrupted more times than I could count by applause. I should also add to you, I probably shouldn't, but I will, but after he made his remarks, which were, again, I thought very heartfelt. One of the reasons I wanted to be there was to see how much did this feel like a speech he's given a million times, written by excellent speechwriters. It didn't feel like that. This felt like something he has been working himself up to say. It felt very authentic, which I think is a big benefit in our current environment.
He's always been kind of authentic. He's always been more of a street fighter, even when he was working for Obama. He doesn't seem to be someone who's completely calculating every word that he says. He does and says stuff off the cuff. I am a Chicagoan, so I remember when he was mayor a bit, So he's a pugnacious guy and not necessarily the most tactful, which is good these days for America.
So what I wanted to say that I shouldn't say is that after the excellence of his remarks, and I do want to say, I think his speech was calculated in a positive sense. He really weighed every word here. He didn't go off the cuff. He had a very clear message. He was there not as a street fighter, but sort of like your tough ass cousin who wants to give you a serious message that you're drinking too much.
Yeah.
You know?
We know lots of clinics.
But the questions, so then there was a context where after his speech, he went to the stage and he was being asked questions by, I think, the two people who had an Institute for Israeli-American Connections or something like that at Tel Aviv University. And I found that very difficult to stay for. I found the questions that he received to reflect, unfortunately, not the best part of the Israeli public space or media space. The questions he got were provincial, were kind of whiny, were kind of calling attention to the speakers. I don't know either of these people. There are kind of commonplace truths that have become acceptable among Israelis who I think are kind of hunkered down in their own world, very defensive. You know, for example, about the question of anti-Semitism, which right now is so truly difficult to discuss because there is undeniably a huge spike in anti-Semitism also in the United States. And we have to be able to discuss that, but also simultaneously, we have to be able to discuss in a clear-eyed way the actions of the sovereign state of Israel. Okay, this is a sovereign state with a legally elected political structure. And if Israel can't be held accountable for its own actions, if anything that any criticism lobbied at the Israeli state is poo-pooed as anti-Semitic, first of all, that harms anyone who is contending with real anti-Semitism. Secondly, that harms the citizens of the state, who therefore are not forced themselves to address what their own government is doing, or to account for the real suffering right now of diasporic Jewish communities. So this is, I'm trying to, like using shorthand, describe a complex ball of wax. And the questions that he faced, the initial questions were just provincial, were, you know, I'm trying to think of the exact question. All I could tell you is that it irritated me. I wanted to get up and leave. It was questions that were self-regarding and that made assumptions about how Israelis feel in a kind of tin pot way, and included like using anti-Semitism as like, you know, I think a real question can be asked and was asked by Yonit Levy, for example, towards Rahm Emanuel about, do you think a Jew can be elected president of the United States? To me, there's not an obvious answer to that question. And he responded to Yonit Levy by saying that he was mayor of a city that has just 2% of Jews, and he believes that the United States could vote for that. He doesn't think that's the issue. But the way these questions were asked in front of an audience that I felt was more open and more sophisticated than the questioners, it just seemed to make things smaller, you know? It didn't address the tough questions brought up by his speech.
Was there any reaction either in the public or in that forum as well that was extremely negative? Like, who is this guy? Who is this interloper? And, you know, tell Rahm Emanuel to shut up and go back to the United States?
Okay, so I didn't answer that question. No. You know what? Interestingly, very interestingly, maybe even significantly, there has been no outrage. The president, the Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, very proudly displayed his picture meeting Rahm Emanuel, talked about the importance of friends, you know, bipartisan friendship across the ocean. And I think that the really right-wing fake media, the kind of Netanyahu's in-house proxies,
Channel 14, yeah.
They ignored it. But the people
isn't that the problem, though? Isn't that just a lot of that happening in Israel? They just kind of ignore uncomfortable stuff. They ignore Gaza. They ignore this message, this clear-eyed message coming from a stalwart of the U.S. political establishment, as well as a prominent figure in the American Jewish community, and they just ignore it. Isn't that in a way the problem? Wouldn't it be better if they showed outrage and drew some attention to it?
Look, in a way, I wish that was the problem, because what you're describing would indicate that just the like Netanyahu proxies in the media, his mouthpieces are ignoring it and everyone else is not. I think the situation in Israel is significantly worse than that. But I don't think it's working. So he wasn't mentioned maybe, or was just joked about on Channel 14, but he gave an extremely important interview to the most popular news program, right? Whatever, like CBS News in the 90s or whatever, a news program that the whole country watches. And he gave interviews to others. He did receive prominent exposure, and there hasn't been any outrage. Like, he was not subject to the sort of filth campaigns.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you, sorry.
Smear jobs.
Yeah, that's exactly. In general, what's happening in Israel right now in the political arena is dangerous and ugly, but not everything is working. If I could bring up something that's not directly connected to Rahm Emanuel, but
Sure.
it may be in the nuance. One of the candidates against Netanyahu, who has been surging, recently, is Gadi Eisenkot, a former chief of staff of the Israeli army. And it's been interesting to see that the standard Likud smear jobs, that even if they haven't worked, right? Like, part of the success of the whole Netanyahu operation for many years is that his own followers didn't really believe him, right? When Netanyahu was arguing that his then top opponent, also a former chief of staff of the army, Benny Gantz, had been, can I use any language I feel like on your pod?
Yeah.
Okay, so Netanyahu,
Better.
in one of the electoral campaigns, Netanyahu argued, I am not joking, that Benny Gantz was screwing around with someone other than his wife, and that the Iranians had footage of, like, the act. This was being put out by official channels. Apparently it never existed. But what happened in those cases is that I don't think a lot of people believed the claim, but it became kind of a national joke. Everyone was laughing about what's
Like
on Benny Gantz's...
Lady Vance and his couch, for example.
Yeah, what's on Benny Gantz's phone? What did the Iranians see? It became like an, bon ton, right? Like a dinner time joke. And that's part of Netanyahu's magic, that even if people don't believe him, like, they don't care. They're happy that he's lying, and, like, he's their bastard, right? He's lying against everyone else, and we know it, but... So that kind of thing doesn't seem to be working. And the case of Eisenkot is really interesting, because I could tell you my theory about this. I mean, months ago, I was already saying that Eisenkot seemed to be displaying a kind of Teflon quality that we haven't seen here in a long time. So Eisenkot is being presented in the media as uncharismatic, as not having, the beautiful
military guy, if I'm correct.
He's a former chief of staff of the army, and he is generally respected, was generally respected, never someone who drew particular attention to himself, but he has certain qualities that now are piercing through during this very particular period. One aspect of this is that he has suffered such losses during this war, this Netanyahu war, that it's almost inconceivable. He lost a son at the beginning of the war who was killed fighting in Gaza. And then, in short order, he lost 2 nephews in the course of a week. So it's been hard. The way the Likud, Netanyahu's party, has been trying to attack him is using racist tropes, overtly racist tropes. And these are doubly racist. They're part of the racist insinuation is because Gadi Eisenkot, who is Israeli-born, Israeli through and through, has Moroccan antecedents. And so there are all of these insinuations about, like, him being an Arab. And then to double up on that, these kind of videos, these clips, kind of TikTok-ish clips being put out by the Likud show him as an Arab embracing Arabs, like the non-Jewish Arabs, right? The Muslim Brotherhood, according to the Likud. Just normal, very much not dangerous Israeli Arab politicians. The thing is, in the past, this stuff always became part, as I was describing to you, like, even if people didn't buy it, they made jokes about it. It took
Right.
over. And it's not working with Eisenkot. I mention this not because there's a direct tie to Rahm Emanuel,
Yeah.
but because it's just not sticking. It's not working. You get the sense that people are too embarrassed to repeat it. It hasn't become a joke. It's like, and so my sense about the Rahm Emanuel thing is that for some people who are really scared that the Likud may be losing badly or that Netanyahu's out of control, people in his camp, they just weren't paying attention. They're the ones ignoring, as you said. But for others who are scrambling, I think they didn't know how to attack Rahm Emanuel, again, whose father was a fighter for Israel, who volunteered at some point. I think he did a few weeks as an American of volunteering with the Israeli army in the early 90s, and who really addressed Israelis as someone who loves them.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that the normal kind of greasy attacks that one would expect, they just didn't materialize this time.
Against Rahm Emanuel. Hey, thanks so much for listening in. That was part one of my interview with Noga Tornopolsky. Tomorrow, we just get deeper. We discuss what's happening in Israel right now with the crisis that Benjamin Netanyahu has created, as well as bigger questions about Israel, where it's at, what it feels about Gaza. This is Borzu Deragahi. This is my podcast. It's called Badlands, and you can subscribe at borzu.substack.com. I'm also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube.